I wonder what we're going to talk about for the next hour. Well, folks, you know the deal. You leave your comments and questions. You want to talk some Florida State football? You want to talk about anything with the team? Of course, we're going to pick up on those comments and questions. We would love to talk some football, but we're about a week away from ACC kickoff. That is the media days there for the ACC, and that should be an interesting affair in terms of how upfront the media is to Mike Norvell and others concerning the uncertainty or proposed uncertainty, apparently, of the conference. So we know what the deal is. We know that that the Big 12 is being rumored as the destination for Florida State. We got Georgitis, the Renegade Report. That's the place to be. And we appreciate George always being here for us on a Wednesday. George, what's going on?
Man, just having a lot of fun, staying super busy. You know, we got the roast on Mondays, and then we got the Renegade Rundown Tuesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Had a whole show talking about this stuff yesterday. The very latest stuff was more just about the Big Ten and the SEC currently just not wanting FSU or be considering expansion or whatever the case may be. But prior to that, yeah, it was all about rumors about Florida State and the Big 12 communicating and it being a possible destination and fast. Arizona blogger for 247, Jason Schnee, I think his name is, or Schnee or something like that, you know, reported that according to sources, FSU and the Big 12 had communicated, and it blew up. Everybody was quote tweeting, doing stories about that tweet and kind of running with a narrative. FSU expected to the Big 12, but that's never really been said by anybody when you really investigate it. And then the latest stuff, what really blew up, what we did our whole show yesterday on the Renegade Report, was Brett McMurphy's article. He did an article basically, you know, just shutting down FSU to the SEC or the Big Ten, according to what you see on the timelines, all the different articles and the podcasts and stuff, which I don't know if you want to pull it up, but we can talk about kind of what was actually in Brett McMurphy's article versus the kind of perception that is put up there. That's what's so irksome. You get 100 messages and all these questions, but oh my gosh, you know, we just found out FSU's not. But then when you actually read the article, if you ask Brett himself, nothing's changed. If you've been a loyal follower here at the Voice of College Football, the Renegade Report, Spear Addicts, or anything like that, there's really zero new information that came out of that, except for almost like laughable, like flammable, you know, anonymous messages, quotes from presidents, whatever, athletic directors, et cetera, like that.
Yeah. So before we tear this article up, which you did as well, I did as well.
Not to cut you off, but just let me make a point. Real, like, when you talk about tearing the article up, and like I've made a few jokes and stuff about Brett McMurphy. Again, when you read the article, he said nothing crazy. He didn't go out of the way. I take more issue with how the people have reported on it and kind of intimated what he said and the inferences he drew from it. Because as you go through it line by line, especially like the first page is pretty kind of buttoned up. It's just so easy to see the qualifiers and the softeners. And when you get to the bottom half, the anonymous quotes, I mean, the contradictions are just, I mean, you laugh out loud and you start rolling on the floor. But yeah, nothing new here for anybody that's really been, you know, following it. But the kind of conclusions other people have drawn from it and the, oh, look, I told you so is extremely hilarious.
Before we get to the article itself, I want to clarify something here, because anybody who's anti-Florida State, a rival, or just loves making fun of whoever seems to be down, I see comments made all over the place about, well, see, Florida State's overestimated their value. They're not worth this or that. And they obviously don't bring value to the Big Ten or the SEC. Okay. That is not true. So, yeah, just talking about Florida State as a brand, they are certainly worthy of playing in the Big Ten or the SEC as a football program team on the field. as a brand that draws interest, sells merchandise, gets people to watch games. All of those things really can't be argued. They're not debatable. I'm not going to sell them as the very tip top of the sport, but certainly well within the top 10. So they add value to either conference. But there is so many other factors involved in terms of either of these conferences making a decision. And before we go back to you, George, and anything you want to, if you want to take the article from the top and we can sift through it, would be the thought from me that the Big Ten just signed a media rights deal and they're only 1 year into it. So them going back to their partners and saying, we're adding Florida State, or we'd like to add Florida State, what does this look like? And getting, yes, in theory and in practicality, Florida State adds value. So it should increase the contract, but do NBC, CBS, and Fox want to tear up a contract, revise a contract, say we're going to add this much, this many zeros to the contract to accommodate Florida State, and then the distribution is, to the liking of the Big Ten once they have to divide it all up again?
Yeah, for sure. Those are all fair questions and things that have to be worked out, and are being thought about and worked out, and the money's being set aside and things of that nature. But definitely fair points. Kind of our opinion as far as on our channel and things we've talked about. You could flip that reverse. Who knows? Maybe Fox is going to the Big Ten and saying, please, can we add Florida State and work it out? We'll be fair. We're going to make sure everybody gets a little bit more, whatever the case may be. It's just of my opinion, as you alluded to, just the bare minimum there. As a top 10 football program, it's worth it to add them. But then you just kind of the area and what it'll do for the whole conference. And just it's putting all these different teams in front of Florida recruits and, getting Florida recruits on these teams to get to play in front of their parents in an away game. There's the whole, we could go for hours talking about the different values that it brings for sure. But that's definitely a good point.
Yeah, what I got into the other day to a certain extent, and I think I've got a pretty good handle on this as well as anyone, is I went through the broadcast windows for Fox, for NBC, and CBS, and how many of those are roughly devoted to the Big Ten throughout a regular day, and then how many games they have to fill with how many teams. And I'm not going to take it down to the nth degree like I did the other day, but yeah, the Big Ten schedule was too thin to hold up on those three networks with all the time slots they had. Maryland and Charlotte was a game on NBC primetime last year, because before you get into conference play, you're looking at just playing a zillion games, and most of them aren't good games. They're a lot of fluff and just a lot of bad matchups and a lot of blowout matchups. So if you got 18 teams running around playing games and you've got like 3 to 4 really good games, and then the rest of it's, belongs in the Big Ten network, then it's tough filling up those time slots. And that's what the Big Ten delivered last year. But of course, now they've added USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. And I attempted to make a projection on what they would add in regards to filling more time slots with quality games. But of course, Florida State would help significantly there.
Yeah, you did a brilliant job articulating exactly why the Big Ten would want Florida State, because it doesn't matter who you put up there. It could be Charlotte. It's still going to do 3-4 million. And that's what the statistics show clearly, that Florida State moves the needle. And if you can put together two teams, you put together Florida State with an Ohio State and Oregon, you're getting top 5, top 10 numbers across the nation in any given year, and that's just kind of a given. It's what's going to happen. It's what you see. So yeah, and it would be huge bringing that, adding the Southeast. When you look at the top 20 and people talk about, the Southeastern Conference being the best, yeah, maybe it is. Big Ten has an argument now, but it's really just the players are in the Southeast. The teams in the Southeast do the best recruiting, and you see it. The 4 or 5 teams in the ACC that are in the top 20 of recruiting, Where are they located? They are located in the Southeast, you know, and that's why you have so many of these teams that have rivalries, straight up rivalries: Florida State, Florida, Clemson, South Carolina, Kentucky, Louisville, and on down the line. So yeah, not to get too far off topic, but we can start attacking this thing here just right out the gate, just with the softeners and the qualifiers. And it's just what's so infuriating when it's, again, not by Brett McMurphy, but other people reported as some giant, just boom, you see that? No way Florida State gets to the Big Ten or the SEC in 2026. Getting another. There we go. Florida State will likely not have a spot in the Big Ten or SEC if now it's already just likely will not have a spot, and now it says if it's successful in leaving the ACC, and here's what's critical, and the ACC stays intact. Now, there's a lot of different meanings, different ways you can look at intact, but in my eyes, that's a oxymoronic statement because there's just no way. FSU and Clemson are the ACC. It just is what it is. That's a paradox, an oxymoronic paradox, whatever you want to call it, that statement. We've looked at the numbers since 2012. Between Florida State and Clemson, you have 60 games with 4 million plus eyeballs. This is what these TV networks, this is what they're really making their money. This is where they make their money on advertisements. To Mark's point, they're not getting it for Virginia versus Charlotte on ACC network. That's just basically, the advertisements on that aren't being great. They need the big numbers. The rest of the ACC combined was 50 games, which is unreal. And when you factor in that a number of those 50 games were probably against FSU or Clemson, it's pretty unreal to the level of what FSU and Clemson are the ACC. Since 1991, the year FSU joined, they couldn't compete till 92, but Clemson won it in 91. They've got 25 out of 32 ACC championships. 25 out of 32. That's pretty amazing. 7 for the rest of the field in the past 30 years. So when that walks out the door, will there be a conference that remains the rights to the name ACC? Maybe that survives. But if you think FSU and Clemson are leaving and that's it, nobody else is going to leave, I say that's a stretch. But I'll give it to you. Just give it to you. That happens in 40% of everything you do walks out the door. There's no way ESPN is going to pay what ACC scrapped up and the little work they did to try to get enough money to keep FSU and Clemson there. There's no way that they're in February of 2025, they're signing on that deal through 2036. Whatever it is, it will be a remnant of that. So in my opinion, the first sentence just completely throws it out. And I'll give you, if you want to say something about that, or we move on.
Yeah. So again, you're making the distinction. Is the ACC going to continue in the name ACC, but it's not the same conference? If it doesn't have those two programs, it's not the same conference. It may maintain the name ACC, but it's not going to be the same conference. And it seems pretty likely that North Carolina is not going to be around either, and then whomever they may take with them. So this is an interesting comment here that an anonymous source makes there in paragraph 3 that, quote, there's no appetite for more expansion. And that's pointing to the fact that it doesn't make financial sense for either league. And then that FSU has shown itself not as a good partner.
Yeah, that's just PR 101, for all the reasons I just named. You tell me how Florida State isn't a good partner. At every turn from 2012, 2016, 2021, they've tried to reason with the ACC, figured things out, talk sense into them. They had all the talks about unequal revenue sharing. They weren't willing to budge on any of that stuff. It's pretty obvious what's going on in the sport. The truth of the matter is FSU and Clemson have been saints. They're literally the last 2 teams left. They're the only 2 teams left in the country that have not left their respective country conferences to head to a power conference outside of Oregon State and Washington State. And what happened to them? So it's laughable. I mean, there's a reason it's anonymous, and why these certain quotes that I said were laughable. But you know, other that you can break the other parts out down, but that's pretty laughable.
So yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, we're going to get to more that I guess you could say supports or is connected to the "it's not a good partner" quote. So when I read that and read what we're going to see here in a second as well that supports that, or I refrain from saying the word support or the phrase support, more about it's connected, it's more of the same, that see Florida State leaving the ACC and turning around to join the SEC. I can see the rationale that why would the sole media provider of the SEC, Disney/ESPN, that's in court right now to an extent. They're showing up at court, from what I understand. They're backing the ACC in a sense. Why would they turn around and sign a deal with Florida State?
So they've been extremely scarce. They've made themselves extremely scarce from the courtroom, and try to distance themselves as much as they can. They showed up once, as far as to my knowledge, early on when they were ordered by, I believe it was the North Carolina judge. But they definitely were not in favor of getting these documents out here. But I'll tell you exactly why. And just again, you know, it's never been reported by us. Other people have reported SEC. But yeah, I agree in the fact that, yeah, it's never been, you know, we've reported the whole time Florida State is looking at the Big Ten. But here's why the SEC could possibly end up being that partner down the road in 2025, 2026, when Florida State finally gets out of the ACC and is a free agent and able to court these teams, is because, you know, it's pretty much the Big Ten and the SEC that are in competition for the top conference in the nation. So the SEC has to look at, what do we get out of Florida State? It's like a trade in the NFL. They're in their final year of their contract. What do? Trade them away to get a little something, or to just let them play the last year and they walk away and that's it? Nothing. Just, we'll see you later. So you know, if the ACC were to stay intact, it's pretty funny. The only chance of the ACC staying intact is the Florida State and the Clemson going to the SEC. That way, that money stays intact. ESPN is losing nothing. So if they, you know, they could continue paying out the rest of those dollar amounts to the rest of the ACC, it'll be crazy. They'll be getting money they're not earning, and FSU and Clemson won't be on their schedule every year anymore. But as far as eyeballs and things like that, it still wouldn't be a wash, in my opinion, because just how much value FSU and Clemson bring to all those other teams. You know, just who is going to watch Syracuse and Virginia, and you know, you name the team in the ACC. Similar, you know, kind of to my take on the Big 12 and what hasn't hit those guys yet. They've had success with teams like TCU and things of that nature. But in those years, it was the miraculous win over Oklahoma or a miraculous upset win over Texas that carried them to that, you know, lofty esteem to end up doing what they do. So it's really not fair. It's college football. But a lot of this talk in here, and that's why I wanted to kind of go through and highlight some of the paragraphs that really stood out. It's not necessarily lies, all of it, but some of it is just sour milk and stuff we've been hearing about Florida State every single year for years and years and years now about, you know, they think they're better than they are and they're not a good partner and yada, yada. But I would think whoever the person is that's counting the dollar bills or doing the business sense, and if you want to talk about a guy in Brett Yormark, there's a reason he wants Florida State so damn bad and is very happy to get these rumors out there. That's because Florida State moves the needle, and you just have to be crazy to not want them for your conference. You know, there's a reasons why certain ones wouldn't work or whatever, but yeah. And you know, just Action Network contacted more than a dozen individuals, including university presidents, conference personnel, athletic directors, network executives, and consultants, and just let that soak in. So if you're anonymous and you're one of these people, unless you're just some naive schoolgirl sitting there, here's my true opinion, I mean, it's literally your job. This is what you do to push PR. So yeah, I do not put any stock into these statements and stuff. And when we get to the bottom, there's one where it's just completely hilarious because it says all this stuff about Florida State in the same sentence, and then talks about how valuable Virginia would be. So it's just really, really, really hilarious. The next part is about, the 3 SEC presidents recently told Action Network that they have no interest in Florida State. It takes 12 of the 16 presidents to favor another school. The commissioner, when they asked him all the questions, he said nothing. He just said, we're talking about the 16. We're worried about the 16 right now. That's all that matters. And I would agree. It's 2024. We're getting ready for the season. There is no chance of Florida State going to the SEC in 2024. There never was. And I'll shut up in just a second unless you talk and get down to the more of it. But just to drive it home again, it's like it's nothing that's news to anybody. Florida State's still fighting to get out of the conference, and that's the first domino that would have to fall before we would see what would happen next.
Yeah, it makes no sense for Greg Sankey to open up the conversation that he certainly has said a number of times over the last couple of years, yeah, we're always reviewing, we're always looking, I don't know that he said had conversations, I wouldn't be surprised, but he's always made it known, yes, I'm running this league, and in the best interest of the league, we're always considering it, but it would be insanely stupid for him to say, yeah, we're actively looking at other programs to bring into the SEC. And then that's all he's going to hear nonstop every time he meets with the media is they're going to, no, he's focused on the 16 and he doesn't need to in any way say anything beyond that. It doesn't serve him. Beautifully said, my friend. And as you see the next ones, you take it for what you want. Big Ten is also not interested, sources said. Petitti's staying away from expansion, and we're taking Tony's lead. Add another. Why would anyone want to expedite more chaos by adding Florida State? Who is that coming? Is that coming from a TV executive, a consultant, a president of a league? If you want to call it reading the temperature or whatever, you call it what you want. One source, however, cautioned never say never about FSU going to the Big Ten because there could be a path if the ACC disintegrates, which again is kind of the whole premise of this whole thing, and what we've said multiple times we bet our lives on, and that's that Florida State is getting ready to leave the ACC. They've reached a decision where it's just not tenable in the future. They have got to get out and get one of these big conferences. And you can quibble, me and you could go back and forth. I think you're pretty closer to my side on that, what's going to happen to the ACC when they leave. But regardless, whatever it is, it's not going to be the same. It's going to be some sort of a fraction, close to it. At best, they could hope to be half the conference they were before without Florida State and Clemson. Yeah, so let's say Florida State and Clemson, let's say they go to the Big Ten. And you've got this layer of programs, starting with Miami, Louisville, Virginia Tech, NC State. They come to mind. Well, North Carolina, they seem to not have an issue. They seem to be attractive enough based on what we're hearing out there that they're good to go. That there's like this layer of 4 or 5 schools. And the way the Big 12 has approached it, they just picked up Arizona State, Colorado, Utah, that they would love to go and pick up those other schools of that tier. Now, if the ACC for some reason would be able to survive the loss of, let's say, they got 17 teams right now. Let's say it's Florida State, Clemson, and North Carolina leave, and they got 14. Well, that's plenty to have a conference, but okay, your conference championship is going to be Virginia Tech, NC State, Louisville is pretty much they're running the league from a football standpoint. I don't know what the powers that be, how they would look at that conference is, we can't give them a seat at the table. Would they'd be a really good group of 5. They're better than a group of 5. I don't know. They'd be in this strange place in terms of how they should be treated and what type of revenue they should be given. they wouldn't earn a automatic bye as a conference champion with that kind of league. So I don't know how that's sustainable. I would think that the Big 12 would go and grab the remainder of any value in the ACC with those roughly 4 schools, and then it would all fall apart after that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just vice versa. Either those two are going to figure out, one's going to merge, they're going to merge, one's going to take, what's left of the carcass of the other, and that's what it's going to be. It's just going to be that much of a bigger gap from the haves and the have-nots. Whatever survives is going to either have 1 or at tops 2 automatic picks, and you're going to have 4 each for the Big Ten and the SEC. It's not going to be anywhere near close. It says here, if the ACC blows up, who picks first between the Big Ten and the SEC? Who picks second? If there's a need and desire to expand, you take inventory so your competitors don't get it. What I was talking about, how FSU could possibly end up in the SEC. But the presidents and chancellors are looking for stability. Despite what social media geniuses are suggesting, no one, the leagues, networks, no one is driving expansion. Well, what is driving it then? How come it just keeps happening? How come the big Pac-12 disintegrated into thin air? And how come this is all anyone anywhere wants to talk about? I get why Florida State shows are talking about it, the FSU voice of college football, but I won't say any names. But why is it that every conference's blog, everybody's talking about the same thing, but there's no interest in Florida State? And then it gets said again, that could change if the ACC no longer exists. It goes to talk about what if the price is getting out too much for Florida State and Clemson, yada, yada. We went over that with a fine tooth comb 100 million times. Florida State has the money laid out. There's no amount of money that's going to stop Florida State from going to the Big Ten or the SEC, whatever they have to get figured out. They're willing to pay that for the long term. A lot of people like to bring up, what if the Big 12 can raise, the 80 million or whatever it's got to be in a couple of years to compete, to get Florida State and Clemson in? Well, that would be great, but it would be pointless, and it would be still not something that Florida State or Clemson, in my opinion, would bite, because it would be just what happened earlier on. They get close to the Big Ten and SEC for a couple of years, but still, even with FSU and Clemson, you would look at it the next time we went to do negotiations, be it for the college football playoff or for TV contracts, and you'd say, okay, the Big Ten and the SEC have 18 of the top 10 or top 20 in recruiting. Okay, they've got 17 of the last 20 national championships. Okay. And there's no comparison. There's just no way in hell that the Big Ten and the SEC are going to accept whatever the Big 12 can scrounge up for Clemson and Florida State. It's just how markets work. And Florida State will be in the same exact position it's in now. And they just keep saying the same shit over and over and over again. The ACC doesn't implode, Florida State could be in a dangerous spot. I don't know if they have a home unless there's a doomsday scenario and ACC implodes. FSU is in a bad spot. Another says the Big Ten is happy where it's at. Yeah, just like they were happy where it's at days before they added Oregon and Washington. What's the upside of Florida State? This is the funny one. What's the upside of Florida State? We get what we needed by adding USC and UCLA, Oregon and Washington. Oregon and Washington were added 50 cents on the dollar to help USC and UCLA. Who would Florida State help, and at what cost? And more importantly, who's going to pay for it? Again, Florida State, that isn't the exact quote I was looking for, but it's coming up. I'll shut up for a little bit.
I will say at the in regards to the Oregon-Washington move to the Big Ten, that, I produced videos, and I make it very clear that I don't consider myself some kind of expert on any of this. From the standpoint that I'm not, I can make projections or predictions if people really want me to. And I think they're probably going to be better than the average person, but I don't expect to be able to read the tea leaves or that I've got some kind of insider information. So I basically produce videos and do live streams where we look at the schools and we say, okay, how valuable is this school? Let's look at the football. Let's look at the athletics department as a whole. Let's look at the TV ratings, what they've been, not just last season, but for a substantial period of time. Let's see what the brand is worth. Let's see the media market there close to the school and how much it impacts the school. So if it's SMU in Dallas, not much. So yeah, they're in Dallas, Texas. an enormous city, but they only care about the Dallas Cowboys, for example. So it's got to mean something. And then on top of that, okay, is the school a fit for what the conference is looking for? And maybe it's a conference that, as long as the football and the money add up, they don't care. But maybe it's the Big Ten where they want a certain school. And I add those up and I come to conclusions. I don't say that they're going to happen or anything. I'm more about, okay, Florida State and Clemson, let's attach them to the Big Ten and let's see what this conference would look like. How good is it going to be? How is Clemson going to fare against the Big Ten? How is Florida State going to fare against the Big Ten? How should they divide the conference into pods? Those are the things that I do. So in no way do I consider myself some kind of expert, but I read into these type of articles. And in addition to these, I do have a few sources that know what's going on. And I don't want to name those just because of their own anonymity. But again, I'm not claiming that in any such way that I have these unbelievable sources all the time. But with the Oregon-Washington, I'll circle back to where we started. The Oregon-Washington, yes, to your point, months and months and months and months and months and months before Oregon and Washington were added, I did videos talking about Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA being in the Big Ten, how they should schedule and do the conference and everything. And then people got upset or they laughed at me because, well, they're not going to join the Big Ten. They applied for the Big Ten months ago, and the Big Ten hasn't accepted them. Well, I said, okay, I'm not making a prediction here. I'm just talking about what could be, number one. Number two, let's hold off and see. And the Big Ten let those two schools hang out for 7 or 8 months before they accepted their application. We all knew when they applied for Big Ten membership, it was like early fall, and the Big Ten didn't pull the trigger until like the next spring. For whatever reason, I don't know exactly. So this stuff doesn't always just happen automatically. So just because somebody gets isn't necessarily play. And of course, the Big Ten can't do anything, right? Or the SEC can't do anything right now. Florida State's in the ACC, so they can't outwardly talk about it or even have open discussion that people can see and know about. Are they talking behind closed doors in some kind of back channel? Probably. But they can't make this stuff known.
Yeah, nobody knows, and that's what's so infuriating about this stuff. This is the spot I thought it was, and this kind of page here is really good stuff, and the stuff that's easy to rip up and tear up. You could scroll up just one spot, though, back to that previous paragraph about other up, yeah. Oh, I see, because there's a picture in between. But you take out that picture, and it's just rant. What's the upside? We got everything we need with USC and UCLA, and at what cost? And who's going to pay for it? And then you scroll down to where we're at now, and it says in the ACC, if the ACC no longer exists and the floodgates opening, allowing a mass exodus, North Carolina and Virginia would be highly sought after by the SEC and Big Ten, sources said. So I thought you had everything you needed from Washington and Oregon and UCLA, and there's no added benefit. You're not going to make any more money getting FSU in there. It's going to cost the country.
Yeah.
The conference a bunch of money, but Virginia and North Carolina, those are huge ones. It's like, it's really completely nonsense. And the next part gets into, they weren't convinced they could trust Florida State. I have no idea what in the world that means. I'm not even going to address it. Look what they did. They got the attorney general involved. Lies. Come on. The attorney general is a Florida Gator. She saw the situation that was going on. She got into it. Saying that Florida State somehow controls the levers of the attorney general of the state, Attorney General Moody. That's wild. Talking about what's a good partner again. We talked about that earlier, about Florida State and Clemson literally being the last two teams left. Not in a power conference, the last two that haven't left. It's not about FSU. Oh, skipped a few there. You skipped a few paragraphs there. You're
Oh,
going
sorry.
in the wrong direction. There you go. Yeah, it's not. Oh, right there. It's not about FSU getting out of the ACC's grant of rights. They're not a fit. Whoever said that, I mean, it's just hilarious. Again, it's another throwaway thing. How could FSU not be a fit in the SEC? I mean, there's no, it's literally in the Southeast. You've already got Florida, its biggest rival, Florida State. It's just crazy. That's crazy. It says it's not about they're not a fit. The next one says there are too many negatives. They've proven to be a disruptive partner. Even if you got them in a similar discounted rate as the Oregon and Washington deal, do you trust them as a partner? I don't know what the hell a disruptive partner is. All I know is that Florida State has completely carried the ACC from the beginning, from when they got there in 1992 to now. This year, winning the conference, being 13-1. There's also Florida. You're moving a little too fast, Warren. Sorry, man. I'm getting a little confused there. There's after Florida State's. This is the one I've really been wanting to get to, though. There's also Florida State's Association of American Universities, the AAU status to consider. Every Big Ten school is a member of the prestigious AAU, except for Nebraska, which was an AAU member when it joined the Big Ten in 2010, but currently is not. Florida State is not an AAU member. Well, that's funny because, there's a board of trustees meeting literally on July 21st. That's coming up Monday, discussing the final steps of Florida State getting their AAU status. And again, just to point out, a lot of these quotes, 90% of them are all in reference to Florida State right now going to the SEC or the Big Ten. And it's why it doesn't make sense in how they've reported it, because nobody has reported Florida State to the Big Ten or SEC in 2024. Maybe somebody has, but it's a cuckoo bird. It's all been 2026 being the most likely year, with an off chance there's a settlement and something could possibly happen in 2025. But yeah, it's always been 2026. And by all means, and everything that we understand, Florida State should be either an AAU member outright or be right there about to get it. There's already plans for a big medical research facility on campus, as well as satellite, research facilities in places like Panama City and possibly Pensacola and things like that. So yeah, and it goes on to say, while it's not a requirement for Big Ten, it's a preference. So again, it's just a preference thing, and it's something that literally Florida State is actively going for. So if you're looking for evidence of why Florida State would be possibly going to the Big Ten, again, this is just more evidence to the positive than the negative. The next thing they say, it's clubby among the presidents. I've never heard a human being say clubby. Cliquish, I don't know what clubby is. That's my best guess. AAU membership is significant to them. So again, what they're saying is Florida State literally has a public board of trustees meeting coming up on the 22nd, where they have outlined they're looking into the financial and the procedural things they need to get done. They've already planned building a medical research facility, doing all these things, sending kids to leadership conferences. They'll be over $1 billion by 2030 in research, should it work out with the AAU deal. They're already at close to $500 million, just making giant strides in research, finally getting approved to do certain type of research they weren't able to do in the past. I don't want to get too off in the weeds on that. But yeah, this is just more reasons why Florida State is a good fit for the Big Ten. It says that the Big Ten and the SEC aren't options. The Big 12 would seem to be a potential landing spot. The only problem, Florida State, Clemson aren't currently enamored with the Big 12, but then again, neither were Utah and Arizona State till they saw the Pac-12 crumbling before their eyes, and look where they ended up. Desperate times call for desperate measures. And this is just a totally opposite situation. So Florida State is USC and Oregon in this situation. They are not Arizona State. They are not Utah. The conference would crumble because FSU and Clemson they could have the option to go right back to the ACC. Like they would eat crow and take them right back with loving arms. I promise we'll try to make Notre Dame join. We promise. It's like, oh my goodness. Brett Yelmark said his league is not looking to add more schools and is focused on integrating 8 new schools. The Big 12 said recently. Yeah, well, nobody ever said anything about the Big 12 or 2024. So that's just, I agree with him.
And in terms of Florida State not being a good partner, so I gave my first thought about the way that hit me the first time I read this article and did a live stream, the whole ESPN part of it. And then the next thing I thought of was I've heard from people that Notre Dame and Florida State don't get along. And of course, Notre Dame is the school on the Big Ten's list at the top to expand to. And of course, that's the prize that the Big Ten wants more than any is Notre Dame. And that maybe it's possible that Notre Dame says, we don't want to join your league if Florida State's going to be in your league.
Are you asking me?
Well, I'm just saying that's a possibility. I don't know. If I was the Big Ten, then I would say, well, then just go ahead and join our league. You haven't joined our league. You're going to keep us, string us along.
I would say ask Texas A&M how that worked out for them, and they got a promise.
So again, that's what I have heard about maybe that angle on the Florida State hate.
Yeah, there was a story about them and North Carolina kind of in that same vein. It's like, yeah, I get it, but again, like Texas A&M got a promise from the SEC. It's like, and literally they still went out and got Texas. So it's like,
yes,
all that talk is all good and well, and it's like this is kind of the same thing you get. It's like until when it comes to the road and it comes down to money and who you're going to add, you're going to, Texas is going to join, Florida State's going to get its opportunity. It's a bunch more of the quotes now. I don't understand why FSU doesn't rally everyone to work together in the ACC. They did. Mike Alford has begged the past 2 years to figure something out. Instead, they're attempting something complicated that ultimately likely won't get them where they want to go. FSU with Clemson not getting an invite. That's not the or FSU and Clemson not getting an invite to the Big Ten or the SEC ? That's not the sentiment of several individuals on social media who defiantly tweet almost daily that both schools are a lock for the Big Ten. Exactly the opposite. Nobody's a lock. Nobody knows anything. The challenge with what's online and social media is those guys have a lot of time on their hands. How do they get away with this nonsense? Are they right sometimes? What's the saying? A broken clock is right twice a day. Is it possible FSU, Clemson actually could get everything done, hundreds of millions of dollars, legal fees? Yeah, sure. In college football's unpredictable future, nothing is certain except for uncertainty. Never say never, a Big Ten source said. But the current sentiment is no for Florida State, who, again, nobody has predicted them to the Big Ten currently. Maybe so, somebody says, but at the SEC's May spring meetings in Destin, Florida, I talked to an SEC president about the league's new logo, 16 teams in a circular formation. I asked if there was room for more. And I guess this is the part where he says there's always room for more. And if so, when or who? I don't know. I guess that's the end of the article.
Yes.
Yeah. I just didn't see the breaking news in there. I didn't see anything that was contrary to anything that's been reported by anybody. It's just a bunch of rocks thrown by anonymous people who you could imagine have every reason to throw rocks. If you're a Vandy, if you're anybody, if you're a Missouri that just came there from the Big 12, anybody who is below a Florida State in the pecking order in the SEC or the Big 10, you're going to ask them anonymously what they think, or Georgia currently even. They're not. You're not going to get. They're not going to pump up and do some favor for FSU. Like, wow, I wish. And then publicly, a president. I mean, if they were to say something, it would come down to collusion, all kind of issues. It's just, But yeah, it's just some of those things that are laughable. You go on a rant about how Florida State doesn't add anything you don't have, and it's not going to be profitable. It's going to cost you money, while out of the same side of your out of a separate side of your mouth saying how valuable Virginia is, and how that they would scramble to go get them. I don't get it. Virginia, Vanderbilt, Indiana. These are the type of teams that eventually they're going to be the next ones. Once Florida State, Clemson, and Notre Dame are into the power conferences, once there's no more talk about them, who is the media going to talk about? They're going to be talking about those teams. Well, how come Vandy gets $120 million a year? Meanwhile, Utah and NC State and Louisville and these guys are only getting like 40 million or whatever, when they're, 3 times the program, they spend 3 times the money on the program, yada, yada. There's going to be that question. Is it a super league? Is it like an NFL style thing? Or is it old timey football? And that's the problem. That's the existential crisis that the ACC is facing, because they're carrying all these old timey football teams, but there's only 2 teams at the top that are literally competing. And I said the stats earlier, 3 national championships out of the last 20, and the other 17 are all in the SEC or Big Ten. It's the SEC lead by a big way. What does the Big Ten stand to gain? A giant bit of that, blue bloodishness or whatever. If you don't consider Florida State a top 10 blue blood, whatever, they're top 3 new blood and working their way towards that status. Florida State, Clemson have 3 of the last whatever national championships. Big Ten doesn't have that many. They really don't. They've got 1 or 2 to the ACC's, 3 in the past 10 years or whatever it is. Or did they just tie it up? I think I'm speaking out of my butt. Ohio State has 2 and Michigan has 1. Is that what it is?
No, you're right. Yeah. 3-2 ACC.
Okay, there you go. So it would be a big deal. As much as great as it was adding Oregon and USC and UCLA and all that, not a lot of recent success there. Big names, but Oregon hasn't won the big one yet. Washington made it to the national championship. It's unfortunate they fell to another Big Ten team. But, as it goes on, the gap's just going to be that much bigger. And sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Just check the stats. Florida State moves the needle. They do all the things, and now they got it right on the field again. You can say they won't go there, but to say they're not a value for the Southeastern Conference or the Big Ten Conference, it's just a political thing for you, and I'll never win.
Now, in terms of this article being anything that should have been written because it's anything new, I don't track Brett McMurphy's articles to see what he's posted in the past. So I'm just thinking that he gained all those sources and all those quotes from whether it was Greg Sankey recently at SEC Media Days, or, it carries some weight if he's able to put on those quotes, the anonymous quotes where he's got the list of titles. Some of those are fairly significant when you throw chancellor names out there, not the names, but that title. But when you start to go into media consultants and everything, shoot, that could be that level of influence could be anything from a big shot to nothing. But
what's clear is that somebody on the other side of the PR from Florida State. I'm sorry, I should have said that.
Well, when a president says something, so that's what I'm thinking carries the weight in that. I'm sorry, what's that?
I was just saying, but which president? Because we know what Florida president's going to say. We all know that Florida doesn't want, so it's like.
Well, apparently 3 from the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he had in that, connected to that quote.
Yeah, no, it's and again, totally fine with the article, and the article can throw some cold water on the conspiracy theorists that are out there saying, yeah, Florida State has a written offer. They're going to be in the Big Ten. They're not even going to play in the ACC this year. There's those people out there. It's totally fine. The issue is the people. And if you look across the internet of the titles of the podcast and the titles and the articles that were written about it, what are they? It's not what you get when they read the article. And same thing as Ross Dellinger did. Brett McMurphy immediately went on a podcast and said, no. That's not what I was saying. I 100% believe if FSU leaves the ACC and they're not doing all this to end up independent in the Big 12, and I'll leave it at that. So it's like, it just is what it is. Yeah, it's the same thing I said on my show. Not to rip him or anything or say that it's crazy. If I had all those sources and could put that article together and put it out there, that'd be fine. But it's just the way that it's reported and the way people act. Like, look, see, I told you, I told you, I told you. But we can go through it a million times, but there's nothing in there that's news, quote unquote. And that's what I said to Matt Baker on his post, because he said something about it, just kind of the temperature. And I was like, just curious, but like, was there anything in there that was news to you? And he said, we could quibble back and forth about what you call news, but he's a respected journalist. And if anything, you could, like you were saying, take it as a temperature of college realignment or whatever. And hey, that's fair. I was just asking what, was there anything you thought that was new? But no, these are arguments we've talked about a ton. The AAU thing has been beat to death. The good partner, and they just need to shut up and do all this stuff, and it's been beat to death. But it's just fun to talk about Florida State, and it does numbers.
Well, the Virginia situation is quite curious to me as well, because I'm not dissing Virginia. It's a great school, and they won a national championship in basketball a few years ago, but they're not any kind of blue blood basketball program. So I'm not saying that they can't be successful in basketball, but they're not going to be looked upon like a North Carolina that actually is one of the very few programs, and probably at the top of the list, that is a basketball program slightly moves the needle, because otherwise basketball just doesn't do it. But Virginia brings, they can bring some really nice sports programs. They've been good in baseball and other sports that, again, don't move the needle at all. Would be a nice addition that, hey, you can play these other sports really well. But their football program is terrible. And it's been terrible. It's historically one of the worst football programs in the country. It's just terrible. They have never finished in the top 10 in the history of the school. They finished at number 13 in the country in 1951. That's their best ranking ever. 70 plus years ago. They're terrible at football. They're horrible. I had Jackie Franchuli from 247 Sports with Virginia come on the other day, and I asked her, I said, can Virginia ever be any good at football? Can they? Because the state plays pretty decent high school football, and they're right next to North Carolina. That's a good football playing state. In Tennessee, you would think, like,
money
to go there as a coach, and what commitment do they need to make? And she said the facilities are a mess, and they're finally catching up with everyone else. And I don't expect her to have the magic answer. She doesn't. She knows what they need to do, what a lot of other football programs need to do. But somebody's got to lose the football games. Everybody can build fancy new facilities and have all this, but hey, if everyone just built a new stadium and new facilities and new training rooms and slides and swimming pools for the players and arcades and gave them everything they wanted and built them brand new, you know what? We still have a football season to play, and somebody's going to lose the game. So there's always going to be a bottom barrel. So to make that climb is extremely difficult. So I was just curious about this Virginia part of it, because maybe they would be the East Coast version of USC bringing UCLA with them. And UCLA brings potential. That's what they bring. They bring a lot of money, endowments, and the school's amazing. It's one of the top schools in the country and all that. But their football program's a mess, and nobody goes to the games. So is the Virginia situation a East Coast version of them being so glad that they've got a relationship that they can attach themselves to North Carolina, I guess? Because otherwise, based on what we've seen football drive the needle, and they've got nothing to offer.
Yeah, you think South Carolina wants Clemson over there, but I'd much rather have that. Clemson's on the Atlantic coast too. I'd much rather have that team in South Carolina than Virginia. But there's no team in the SEC to oppose Virginia. It's a safe. It's not polarizing. It doesn't mean that's why they're fine with saying, "Oh yeah, bring them over, North Carolina and Virginia." but that's just it just makes me laugh. I get it. You're always going to have anonymous things out there. And there are, sometimes when anonymous messaging is important and you learn from it. But I would just glean from this, just, the temperature and that there's not something about to happen right now. But if they truly didn't think it was going to happen, if like there really was like a conference thing against Florida State, there'd be somebody willing to put their name on it, and as far as what FSU brings, as far as moving the needle, all that, I would just say ask LSU, ask Alabama, who we start a home and home with next year. Ask all these teams that are lining up to get a piece of Florida State out of the SEC.
The other theory that I know is out there is that the SEC believes, okay, we're the best football conference. We don't need to get any better there. What if we go get, and we're amazing at all these other sports, baseball, every conceivable sport, tennis, golf, women's basketball, everything, but our men's basketball is not the best. Go get Duke and North Carolina, or North Carolina and Virginia, because they're going to give us the flagship school in both of those states, and we are not in those states now, and that would be a big deal for the SEC.
Yeah, I see the idea, and I could get it for North Carolina due to their potential on the football field and the fact that they do have that great brand and all that stuff. And not saying Virginia couldn't end up. I don't know if it moves the needle enough to make that, maybe as like a second partner or something. But like you were saying earlier, it's just hard to wrap your mind of if you're the SEC. I'm of the mind that Vanderbilt and whoever else start looking over their shoulder before they get to add the Virginias of the world. But we shall see.
My final point, George, would be, again, I'm going to go back to this, and I'm not claiming that chancellors and presidents think like this, but the Big Ten has everything. Amazing academic institutions. The football brand is amazing with all these blue bloods and TV ratings and money. The media rights are the best in college football. They check every box. They don't have enough football players in their footprint. And I've always said, Ohio State's the only school out of the Big Ten that comes into Florida and battles for the best players. If Nebraska or Penn State or a school like that, and I know somebody's going to come up with some aberration, some outlier, like 5 years ago, Michigan signed the 10th best player in Florida or something. I'm talking about on a regular basis. This is not even close. Ohio State is the only school from the Big Ten that can go to Florida and battle Florida State, Miami, Florida, and everybody else that comes down there, Notre Dame and Alabama and Georgia, for players. Nobody else, if Nebraska signs a player out of Florida, they're the 80th best player in Florida. Same thing with Penn State even. I would think that if somebody could, and maybe they have, explained to these administrators, this is what we don't have, is we don't have enough football players. And I know with NIL, it's somewhat changed it, but players still generally stay in their state or region that you need. And suddenly, if top players from Florida know that Penn State's going to be down there playing Florida State and Clemson, or Florida State and Miami, whoever you want to fill in the blank, then it changes the dynamics of the players that those other schools might be able to get.
It's huge. I mean, it's just huge. And like I was saying earlier, if you're a Florida kid on Ohio State, all of a sudden you get to play. When you play Florida State, you get to go home. It's same thing for Florida State. All of a sudden you get pipelines. Maybe that linebacker or offensive lineman from the Midwest that used to wouldn't give you a shot is because whatever, 4 or 5 games a year, you're going to be up in Big Ten country for his family to come. And a lot of people talk about, and some of the talk about Virginia and North Carolina and the different thing is the old cable box kind of theory of, even though Virginia's not good at football, they're smack dab, they're proud of DMV, so it's 30 million cable boxes and all that stuff. That's just not how cable works anymore. That is just not how it works anymore. You throw all that stuff out. You have to actually get the eyeballs to look. So when you add a Florida State right there, smack dab center of the southeastern quadrant of the United States, it's huge for the Big Ten. I mean, you're exposing all of those teams to Florida, to the South, whether they get the recruits or not. Even the guys that don't get the top guys like Ohio State, being able to get the 80th or 90th guy out of Florida is going to be a boon for a lot of schools up there. Maybe better than later. But more than any of that, the part I keep forgetting is just the fans of college football exist in the South. The people that are watching the game, the Southeastern United States,
True.
all of a sudden, what kind of bump does Ohio State's fan base get from adding Florida State to the schedule, Michigan down the road? Like it's substantial. Like that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just a homer, but I think it is.
Well, what you just said there is completely factual in that if you look at TV ratings in isolated markets on college football Saturdays, it's almost funny because so the Big Ten makes up for it in that they have more people to draw from, but a smaller concentration of them. So for example, let's say there's 100,000 people in Tallahassee. It's a crazy percentage of how many of them are watching Florida State and watching other games versus in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or Chicago, Illinois. Obviously, Chicago is enormous. There's zillions of people walking the streets and otherwise that don't care anything about college football. But obviously, because the city is so large, there's a lot of people watching college football there, but it's not a large concentration. So my point is, if you look at the individual markets, it's almost funny. If you look at what 10 markets rated the best on a given college football Saturday, they're basically in Alabama, Georgia, North Florida, and Columbus, Ohio. And that's like all of it. That's what it is.
That's football, baby. Yeah, it would be big, man. It would be big.
And for a nerd like me, George, sure, I would think it would be kind of interesting to see Florida State play Oklahoma State or Kansas State. They never play those teams, or Utah. Yeah, would those be decent football games? Sure. But Florida State would have the opportunity, if they are revving up at their best, if this is Bobby Bowden, if this is Jimbo for most of his tenure, if this is Norvell the last 2 years, they could run roughshod over that conference. And that was part of my video the other day, that's just the way it is. Those are nice matchups. They could be fun and intriguing. They'd be different. But Penn State at Doak Campbell Stadium, Florida State at the Shoe, at the those are, off the scale.
What Florida State cut their teeth on was going to visit these teams back in the day.
They did.
Any place, anywhere, it would be a ton of fun. And again, it's Florida State, it's Clemson, it's Notre Dame. Those are the only three teams that are left. And just ask yourself the question: if you're finding you're having a hard time believing that Florida State's going to get a seat with the power to, just ask yourself why is every channel on all of college football media talking about Florida State? If they don't bring anything, it's like whatever. Believe what you want. You either love us or you love to hate us. One of the two. And that makes money and changes eyeballs. It's like they've got all these movies made about Florida State, what the Van Wilder series, the program loosely based. It's like there's just so many things, so many tips to the hat. Like when a lot of people think of football, college football, they think of Osceola and Renegade, and Florida State University as one of those teams.
It'd be fun to see Florida State go out and play USC. It'd be fun to see them play in the Rose Bowl against UCLA. Yeah, absolutely. All right, George, what's going on at the Renegade Report?
Just staying busy. Our girl Jen isn't feeling good, so we get some prayers out there for her to start feeling better. There's some bugs going around this time of year. But yeah, she had her roast on Monday with Tiny Hat. They went and tore down the whole Jason Scheer tweet and all the rumors that came out of that. Had some fun, poking fun out of that Love Island style. Yesterday, me and Deshaun did a podcast, talked a little recruiting at the end, but mainly really got into all the FSU to the Big Ten and SEC rumors, kind of like we did here, but just a little bit more in detail. And we'll be back Friday with more of the breaking news with AG Moody and the court dates coming up, commitments this weekend. Saturday we got Boosie, and then Sunday we got Vernell Brown. See if we get one of those commitments out of there, and be back Sunday. And just the regular schedule. Again, it's at the Renegade Report, as he has right there on YouTube. You can find us, hit that sub button. We really appreciate it as we try to get to 3,000.
George, do we know when Mike Norvell and players will be at ACC kickoff?
That is a good question. I should have the answer to that. I believe it's next week. I don't know if it would be Monday or Tuesday or whatever specific time they had. So I apologize for that.
No, that's fine.
I'm not.
I know it's next week. I just didn't know
it
was their day.
I can tell you that Darius Washington, Joshua Farmer, and I'm forgetting. Joshua Farmer, Darius Washington, and one more if I can remember. Patrick Payton. Patrick Payton, Darius Washington, and Joshua Farmer are going to be the guys that go to the ACC Media Days with Mike Norvell. And for those that are keeping track, that's 3 high school recruits from the 2019, Darius Washington, and then both 2021 for Farmer and Payton that he's taken there. So contrary to popular belief, Florida State does. They keep and develop these high school recruits, and you go check out where the 2021 class is, where the 22 class is, and then where 23, 24, 25 are, and just get ready. It's a lot of fun for Florida State Seminoles, and the future is bright.
George, we appreciate you doing this. Appreciate you being here for us on Wednesdays. And everyone, head on over to the Renegade Report and make sure that you like those videos and you check out what George has in store and support over there. George, we appreciate you. You have a great rest of your week, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, man. Thanks for being here with us every Wednesday. And it's all about the Noles, man. We got to keep them up to date.